Welcome to Wake, a cold reading of James Joyce's Finnegans Wake, just to hear it out loud. Join Toby Malone and TJ Young, along with some special friends, as we puzzle our way through what we once thought was an unreadable book to produce a surprisingly listenable podcast. It is Thursday, May 30th, 2024. It has been 14 days since we have started reading, with 47 pages complete of 628, meaning we have 581 pages left to go, and are 7.4% of the way through Finnegans Wake. Welcome to episode 5 of Wake, the podcast where we used to start by saying that this was an experiment that had no true meaning, purpose, or structure, but it's becoming a little more than that these days. Regardless, it still fulfills a long-held bucket list item, reading James Joyce's Finnegans Wake out loud just once. I'm your host, Toby Malone, joined again by my partner, TJ Young. TJ, you introduced me to the concept of an partner a few years ago, and it tickles me every time.
I'm glad, because I was reading through a book and I saw that and I was like, I know exactly who this title belongs to, and it makes me happy. And you might not want me to do this. I don't care. This is not only our 5th episode; it's also your birthday.
Thank you.
And so I get to spend your birthday with you virtually, which is exciting. But also, we get to do something cool together that we are both falling in love with. So
absolutely, I'm very, very pleased to be here on my birthday. I couldn't think of many better ways to spend the afternoon with you reading some Joyce. So thank you. I appreciate it. Yes, it's been a nice birthday so far. So yeah, as my partner, we are partners in art in lots of different ways. I dramaturg your plays, you dramaturg my plays. We've collaborated on leadership for the Kennedy Center a bunch over the years. We've created a lot of stuff. And the most recent thing we were talking about in terms of artistic collaboration was I had this idea and I thought, I'll text you this idea, but you'll probably laugh at me. And you texted right back and said, I had the same idea. I texted you and said, I've decided that if we finish Finnegans Wake, I am going to get a Finnegans Wake tattoo. And you responded immediately and said, I was thinking the same thing. So,
yeah, I was.
So have you had any thoughts about what kind of content would be a Finnegans Wake tattoo?
I was bouncing back and forth between, is it a line of dialogue from the book that I find really kind of interesting? Is it the line of a dialogue but put an image to it that I can kind of associate? Or is it just some loose association that comes up in the I don't know. And
yeah.
I think the important thing is I think that this is going to break my personal ethos for my tattoos, which is, you don't know this, it's either space themed or animals. I don't know why.
Right.
But I was like, I don't see Finnegans Wake going to space. This is just...
There could be possible. An animal. There could be a totemic animal later on.
There could be, right? And so I'm kind of holding out for that just to make it easy. But there also might be just a turn of phrase that I really, really like that talks about animals or the
absolutely.
Sky.
Yeah, I mean, and if nothing else, you can just fall back on "Here comes everybody."
Very true. Very true.
It means so many different things. You just allow the viewer to, someone standing next to you on the subway to go like, why has he got "Here comes everybody" on his neck? and just to clarify for my mother's sake, who's probably listening, I'm not getting a neck tattoo, don't worry. But still, it's
I could see me getting that right behind the ear, as it comes down. That would actually probably hurt, but it might be fun to have.
Yeah, absolutely. No, so that's something that obviously we're a ways away from that. We're barely 50 pages in, 7.4% of the way through, but we are picking up some momentum, and so we're very pleased to be doing this. So we're starting to really get our feel for what the Wake can be, but we're trying hard as we can not to overtax ourselves by striving too far. But like I said in the last couple of episodes ago, it's tempting to say, let's try and knock out 40 pages today, but it's exhausting, and I don't know if that's the best thing for the project. We also have to be aware of the purists out there, those faceless purists who are
Show yourself,
judging us at every
you
step.
cowards.
Yes, who are probably sitting there saying, "I'm delighted this even exists."
Yeah.
But yeah, so we're trying not to overdo it. So what we're going to do is we're generally going to split chapters into half. And they usually come in at around 20 or 25 pages. And so today we're going to do 13 pages, the first 13 pages of chapter 1-3, in which we're going to hear more about the outrages that Dublin have perpetuated on HCE. Now, I was thinking about this week. I mean, in terms of this slander, in terms of all these rumors and all these people talking smack about our friend HCE, I mean, what do you think this says about Joyce in terms of the building this character who has so many people talking nonsense about him?
Yeah, I think it's actually just a really great literary device because in the theater world we always say, yeah, what does your character say, but what do other characters say about you? And that
Mm,
informs like the audience's perspective. So even as we have all these characters saying all these bad things about HCE, it sets up this expectation of what are we going to do when we meet him, right? What are our expectations around that, and how can Joyce subvert that? And so we're going in being like, oh, this dude must be terrible. And I'm interested to see that he's probably not as bad as everyone says he is.
right.
But also, I always think it's kind of interesting, when you meet those people that your friends are like, oh, yeah, they're awful. They're the scum of the earth. And you meet them, you're like, they're fine.
Yeah.
Like, sorry that they did this one thing to you, but like,
Yeah. Yeah.
they're okay. Uh,
Yeah.
so yeah, I think that he's playing with that. I can already tell that he's playing with that.
Mm-hmm. And so, how do you deal with the haters? You got any any strategies if for HCE?
Oh, I mean, to be blessed is to have enemies. You know what I mean? So like,
Is you doing something right?
exactly. I'm like, oh, you're mad. Oh no. Um,
But it's
I
got to be
have.
hard as a playwright, right? I mean, you're putting work out into the world, and then a critic says something about your like you had a play performed in New York recently. It was very
Oh yeah, someone
successfully.
called it pretentious, which also was
Ooh,
hilarious to me. Which I was like, thank you. I'm important. You
yeah,
know.
it's theater. We are pretending. Thank you very much.
Yeah, yeah. And so, it's always one of those things where I'm like, I don't want my stuff to be for everybody because then I think we're in the phase of television. This is a whole nother thing where it's just like, it's okay.
Hmm.
It's trying to please too many people. So I'd rather, in the words of title of the show, I'd rather be 9 people's favorite thing than 100 people's ninth favorite thing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. That's a really good way of putting it. Because I always thought that the worst thing something could be would be like, yeah, it's all right. Because
Yeah,
it's forgettable. And
yeah.
the thing about Finnegans Wake is it's not in any way forgettable. I think it's one of those things. I don't think anyone comes to the end of this book feeling ambivalent about it. They're
They
either
have some emotion about it.
they're either really mad at Joyce for making them get all the way through, or they fall in love with it and decide actually this is a monumental work of genius. And like I said earlier on, I don't think many people get to the end unless they love it. I mean, it's interesting though because Joyce has clearly put so much thought into that relationship between the author and the audience, and the fact that all of these concepts have been put out there to be interpreted by people who understand Dublin, who understand the society of the 1920s, who understand a lot of these references. And maybe, obviously, he's not expecting people to all understand all of the references, but I think I felt like he in many ways was writing this, laying breadcrumbs, thinking people will love picking these breadcrumbs up, following it, untangling this. This will be studied for years in universities, and people will write books. And he must have been so devastating for him to be so roundly dismissed when excerpts were published in advance, and then when it was released, and his brother came out and said, "This is the worst thing I've ever."
He's like, what the hell? Yeah.
Yeah, getting all these critics coming out and saying, "I don't. Why would you do this to us?" Have you ever had the experience of writing something where people don't get what you're aiming for, or are you driving for a deeper point that people don't put the work in to follow along with what you're hoping for?
I've come to the edge of that, and to be honest with you, I kind of am waiting and hopeful for the day where I'm brave enough to write something to just be like, this is what it is, right? And if you hate it, dope. But on the other edge of that, for that part to just be over with,
Mm.
right? Because then it's like, all right, cool. It's like people who like Philip Glass. There are people who like Philip Glass, and there are people who don't like Philip Glass. You know what I mean? There are people who like Steve Reich and people who don't like Steve Reich. And I'm like, cool, you feel some type of way about it. But the people who are into Philip Glass are like into Philip Glass. You
Hmm.
know what I mean? Um, and Philip Glass is considered one of the most like renowned musicians alive currently. But some people hate his music. And I'm like, at one point in time, Philip had to be like, yeah, people hate this. I like it.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to keep making it. And then he found other people who were like, no, I see what you're actually doing. We're going to keep doing this. I think that, you know, we talked about, could this have been the work of a younger Joyce? And we said no, because it probably wouldn't have gotten published. Right. But in today's age, people can put all sorts of crazy stuff out, and I've seen some movies. I'm like, this is insane. I don't know
Hmm.
why people like it. But then, 10 years later, that same director, you can see the remnants of that director's like crazy idea in something quote unquote mainstream, and you're like, oh, they actually just refined what they're doing.
Yeah, and it's
Um,
interesting to think about whether or not an excerpt from The Wake, like if The Wake was 95 pages long total, and that was all it was, would it be, is part of the reason why it's so misunderstood because it's very, very long,
right.
as opposed to if it was a chapbook or something that was a short story that you could you could still feasibly absorb even if you don't understand it, and you can go back. But because there's so much in here, I mean, you could just study for the rest of your life and barely move past the first section of the book,
Yeah,
because there's so much to untangle. So yeah, it's an interesting thing.
I've been feeling the same way about. I've been reading Moby Dick lately for a project, and it's like, I was like, I don't need all this whale stuff. I don't need chapters about fish guts, right? And it's Moby Dick is also one of those books everyone's like, oh yeah, Moby Dick, the great American novel. I'm like, you haven't read it.
Right.
Shut up,
Yeah, yeah.
because you there's no way you've read this all the way through.
Yeah.
Um, but still, I've found people who are on either side of it. People who are obsessed with Moby Dick, and people who hate it.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know?
I always feel as though a lot of those details, as we're learning about the history of whaling and learning about fish guts and all that kind of stuff, um, kind of mimics the monotony of being out there on the ocean.
Yeah.
And there's so much time where you're not chasing whales, where you're just it's been a week and the wind hasn't blown, so we're just sitting here. It's and there's a meaning to it. It just makes me think. Years ago, I saw a production by the Worcester Group, which is a New York City experimental theatre group, who did a production of Tennessee Williams' View Carré, which is a very underperformed play for many good reasons. It's not great. I mean, it's certainly no streetcar, but this production of View Carré, which they performed here in Toronto, they got around. They basically did this fairly radical adaptation of the text, and one of the ways they got around removing text that they didn't want to use, they didn't want to have actors say this text, was that they would take the lines that they had cut and they would project them on the back wall of the stage. So as the scene was going on, they'd cut the script, which they weren't allowed to do, or I think they must have had some kind of permission, but they got around it by putting the script, putting the fragments of the script on the stage. So you say, well, you saw all of the words from the play; they were
Mm-hmm.
there. We just didn't say them all, and it's really clever. Yeah, it's an interesting way of sort of winnowing down. I'm not sure you could adapt Finnegans Wake. I haven't done any research into whether or not there have been any kind of experimental adaptations, but I mean, anything that exists can only be scratching the surface of a corner of one paragraph of one page, really.
Oh,
But
100%.
I may be wrong, and I'm sure the purists out there are saying, but what about the short film of 1972?
And you're like,
Um,
okay.
yeah, but I'm sure we'll do some background research and I'll realize that I'm very wrong. But yeah, it's interesting. And as we move into this next section, I mean, it's a fairly standard chapter. There's nothing really particularly interesting going on, nothing in terms of the typography or the structure, but it is a far less accessible chapter than the previous one. And so we got all cocky last episode. We were like, hey, we kind of get it now. We're on board and we see where it's going.
We're about to lose it.
But I did a little in another minor lapse of judgment. I glanced at a summary of the chapter on a site that I want to promote in a second. And the gist of the summary, because I'm not going to get into the narrative detail of what happens, but is that the relative clarity of 1-2 is now replaced by, quote, a sudden plunge into extreme obscurity, which is marked by the chapter's second word, Sdense. So we have a Sdense chapter coming up. And we knew there were going to be chapters like this, and we're ready. We're all ready to go. We've never been reading for narrative just to hear the poetry, so we're feeling positive about what this brings. The site I wanted to bring up is sadly now dormant. And I say sadly because it's a project not unlike ours. It's called Wake in Progress, which is obviously a reference to the two titles that the book has had. And it's written by a very clever man named Stephen Crow, who set himself the task of illustrating Finnegans Wake. And I found it because I was looking for Finnegans Wake tattoo ideas. There's not many out there. There's one or two, but not many people have got these Finnegans Wake tattoos. And I found this one, and this guy's an artist or a cartoonist. And he what he's done is he set himself the challenge to provide an illustration for every page of the Wake, often along with a quotation with it. So the bad news is the project was pretty much impossible for him to maintain, most likely because he was reading carefully and looking for real meaning, unlike us. And he only got as far as page 34 before he finally ended the project. Took him sort of 6 years to
He's like, I'm done.
Yeah, and he sort of shifted over to illustrating other things like Ulysses and stuff, and then he went over and did a lot more commercial kinds of cartooning. But sadly, yeah, it's there's a lot of really interesting things there, but the site's been dormant since 2018. So if you go to wakeinprogress.com, you can see what I mean. So it's a really interesting site, and lots of and each page sort of looking at how he's interpreting. He's also got summaries of the chapters that he got to, but didn't get much further than where we are now. So I think maybe it was when he hit this wall of obscurity that we're about to hit, honestly. We're going to march into that obscurity and see what we can find. As always, we're reading from the Penguin Modern Classics edition of Finnegans Wake, published in 2000 with a foreword by Seamus Dean. Today we'll be reading the first half of chapter 1-3 from pages 48 to 61 in this edition. This section is titled The Humphreyad 2, Continuing Study of Other Outrages Against HCE, and that's named by the Oxford World's Classic Edition of 2012, which also includes brief summaries of what's happening in each subsection, which we will address at the end of the reading. And without further ado, Finnegans Wake. Chest C, Sdense, Corpo di Baraggio, you spoof of visibility in a freak fog, of mixed-sex cases among goats, hill cat and plain mousy, bigamy Bob and his old Shanvocht. The Blackfriars treacle plaster outrage belittled. Therewith was released in that King's Rick of Humidia a poisoning volume of cloud barrage indeed. Yet all they who heard or redelivered are now with that family of bards, and Virgo Bratus himself, and the crowd of cara calculatios, as much no more as be they not yet now, or had they then not ever been. Can be in some future, we shall presently hear amid those Zoeve players of Inkerman, the mime mumming, the Mick and his Nick, miming their Maggies, Hilton St. Just, Mr. Frank Smith, Ivan St. Austell, Mr. J.F. Jones, Coleman of Lucan taking 4 parts, a choir of the O'Daly O'Doyles double-sixing the chorus in Fen MacColl and the Servan Furies of Loch Nish, Galloper Tropler and Hurlequin, the Zitherer of the past with his merry men all, zim-zim, zim-zim. Of the persons in this Irregularshig saga, which thorough readable to int from, and is from tub to bottom all false tissues, anti-libellous and non-actionable, and this applies to its whole volume, of poor Osty Fosty, described as quite a musical genius in a small way, and the owner of an exceedingly nice ear, with tenorist voice to match, not alone, but a very major poet of the poorly meritary order, He began Tuanisonian, but worked his passage up as far as the we all hang together Animandavites. No one end is known. If they whistled him before he had curtains up, they are whistling him still after his curtain doom's doom. A foo. His husband, poor old Ahara, Okaroff, crestfallen by things and down at heels at the time, they squeak, except in the Zachnocht, Ardry's shilling at the conclusion of the Crimean War, and having flown his wild geese, alone in crowds to wander on like Shuley Looney, enlisted in Tyrone's horse, the Irish whites, and soldiered a bit with Wolsey under the assumed name of Blanco Fusilovna Buklovich. Spurious. After which the core and the marble halls of Pump Court Columbarium, the home of the old Seekings, looked upon each other and queth their haven evermore, for it transpires that on the other side of the water it came about that on the field of Vasilis Cornix, inauspiciously with his unit, he perished, saying, "This papal leafless to old chap give, roll chol cates for mouther in louth." Bool. Poor old deal, poor Horan, to satisfy his literary as well as his criminal aspirations, at the suggestion thrown out by the doomster in Locacity Lunacy, so says the Dublin Intelligence, was thrown into a Ridley's for inmates in the northern counties. Under the name of O'Rani, he may have been the utility man of the troop capable of sustaining long parts at short notice. He was. Sordid Sam, a dour decent de Blanca, the unwashed, haunted always by his ham, the unwished at a word from Israfel the summoner, passed away painlessly after life's ups and downs one Halloween night, ebrous and in the state of nature, propelled from behind into the great beyond, by foot blows, coolin clouted upon his oyster, and Atlas on behanged and behooved and behicked and beholped of his last fishin' blood bed scrappers, a Northwegian, and his mate of the she-wolfing class. Though the last straw glimped his bearing this stage, thunk hard is said, the pitfalling gagged him as prompt a boxer, to have solemnly said, as had the brief thought, but fell in till his head like a bass, dropped neck fussed in till a bung crate, cogged. Me drams O'Loughlin's has come through. Now let the centuple selves of my Egorge, as Nicholas de Cusack calls them, of all of whose I in my hereinafter, of course, by recourse demission me, by the coincidence of their contraries reamalgamerge in that identity of undiscernibles, where the Baxters and the Fleshmans may they cease to be divillans and, but at this point, through the iron thrust of his cockspurt start, might have prepared us, we are well nigh stink-pothered by the mustard plunge in the tail end. This outstanding brown castle stock melt Nolans into peace. Hanvar. Disliken as he was to Druidirama, her wife Langley, the prophet, and the decentest dozenest short of a frusca, whoever stuck his spickle through his spoke, disappeared. In which to-doing, he has taken all the French leaves unavailable out of Calumniquiller's pravities from the sour face of this earth, that austral plane he had transmarried himself to, so entirely spurlessly, the mother of the book, with a dust whisk, tabula racing his obliteration done upon her involucrum, as to tickle the speculative to all but opine, since the Levy who might have been Langley may have really been a right Divius of paganism or volunteer Vouston, that the hobo, who possessed a large amount of the humoresque, had transtuled his funster's latitat to finsterest interimost. Be she. Again, if Father San Brown, tea and toaster to that quaintest of yarn spinners, is Padre Don Bruno, Tren and Troster to the Queen of Spain, was the Reverend, the Sodality Director, the eupeptic Vice Flayer, a bare-faced Carmelite to whose palpitating pulpit, which of us but remembers the rare, valent and honourable Fratermeister Norland Moore and Braun. Sinning Society Sirens, see the Roman Catholic Press Passim, fortunately, became so enthusiastically attached and was an objectionable ass who very occasionally cockaded a raffles ticket on his hat, which he wore all to one side like the hangle of his pan. If her elegance saw him, she'd have the canary. And was semi-privately convicted of malpractices with his hot-wash table knife, glossing over the cark in his pocket. That same snob of the Dunhill, fully several year-shams riper, encountered by the General on that red-letter morning or May noon Jove's day, and were they? Phuit, phuit. When Fishlin Phil once throws his lip, 'tis folly to be fortune flaunting, and whoever's gone to Mick's Hotel by the salt say water, there's nix to nothing we can do, for he's never again to see. It is nebulous and autodidact fact of the commonest that the shape of the average human cloudy fizz, whereas sallow has long days faded, frequently altered its ego with the possing of the showers, not original. Whence it is a slopperish manner, given the wet and low visibility, since in this Scheherazade of 1001 nightinesses, that sword of certainty which would infidetide the body never falls. To identifying the individuone in scratch wig, square cuts, stock lavalier, regrettable oxiter, baggy pants, and shufflers, he is often alluded to as Sly Patrick, that lad in the lane, with already an incipience, lust in the direction of area baldness. One is continually first meeting with odd sorts of others at all sorts of ages, who was asked by free board school shirkers in drench coats overall, Will, Con, and Otto, to tell them over agate, Vol, Pov, and Dev, that fisherbed ghost story of the hardly creditable adventures of the haberdasher, the two Kirchies and the three ankle chums in their bearskin goats. Girls and jongers, but he has changed a lock sign Thorkel's time. Ya, da, tra, gathery, primp, chesses, Shosaphat, Okadaboko, 9. Those many warts, those slummy patches, half sinister wrinkles, what has come over the face and whole broader E? And shine of Mount Moo, save us! The large fungo park, he has grown. Drink! Sport's a common thing. It was the Lord's own day for damp. To wait for a postponed regatta's eventualizing is not of battlecock shettle-door, juxta mare only, and the request for a fully armed explanation was put, in lieu of Pat, to the Porty, a native of the sister isle, Meathman or Meccan, by his brogue, X-ray size, local colour, and lucal odour, which are said to have been average clown Turkish, though the capitalists voiced nasal liquids and the way he sneezed at Z's haul us back to the Creogs and Brins of the Silurian Ordovices, who the lesser pilgrimage accomplished, had made, Patson Pig's older insult, the southeast bluffs of the stranger stepshore, a regifugium persecutorium, hence hindquarters. As he paused at Evenchime for some or so minutes, hit the pipe, Danny boy, time to one, barman, I'll take 10 to win, amid the devil's own one doldrum, Apple by her blossom window, and Charlotte at her tossed panamancy, whose sole admirers, his only tierts in store, for a fragrant culabosh during his week-end pastime of executing with Annie Oakley deadliness the consumatory pairs of provocatives, of which remained provokingly but two, the ones he fell for, Lily and Tutu, corkum, empties which had not very long before contained Reed's family. You ruad that before, Soki, but all the bottles in sodomed history would not soften your bloodthirst. Stout. Having reprimed his repeater and rest-roomed his timepiece, his revenances, with still a life or two to spare for the space of his occupancy of a world at a time, rose to his feet, and there, far from Tolkaheim, in a quiet English garden, commonplace, since known as Whittington Wild, his simple, intensive Curulin vocality, my dear Braithers, my most dear Braithers, as he, so is a supper, as is a sipper, spake of the one and told of the common passionate, called up before the triad of precocious scare-makers. Score-taking, spegulo ni helpus almal bellulo, mi credus qui vi estis prava, via dote la visigo respondas fraulino. The now to usher mythical habiliments of our far and Arthur of our Doyen. Television kills telephony in Brothers Boyle. Our eyes demand their turn. Let them be seen. And wolf-bone balefires blaze the trail most, if only that Mary Nothing may burst her bibby buckshee. When they set fire, then she's got to glow, so we may stand some chances of warming to what every circabacha, tum or hum would like to know. The first Humphreys, latitudinous beaver with puggery behind, calaboose, belong, big boss, belong, kang the tall, his four-in-hand bow, his elbaroom surtout, the reef-faced unmentionables of gingerine hue, the state slate umbrella, his gruff woolsey welsey with the findrin knopfs, and the gauntlet upon the hand which in an hour not for him solely evil had struck down the might he might have been, d'Ester, of whom his nation seemed most almost ready to be about to have need. Then, stealing his thunder, but in the befitting legerdemain of the smaller country, probable words possibly said of field family gleaming, a bit duskish and flavoured with a smile, seen as how his thoughts consisted chiefly of the cheerio, he aptly sketched for our soon-to-be second parents, Suckand and YCYB, the touching scene, the solence of that stilling. Here one might a fin fell, boomster rom bom bonant. It seems like a landscape from Wildu Picturesque, or some scene on some dim arras, dumb as mum's mutinous. This mimage of the 77th Cusin of Christensen is audible to us across the wineless air, no odor nor mere eerie nor less potent of suggestion than in the tales of the Tingmount. Prigged. And there, oft after, jaunty jogging on an Irish yishavish, instead of the with shoulder to shoulder, ye who will tell to Christiana, saint to sage, the comfreyad of that fall and rise, while Daisy winks at her pinker sister, among the tussocks and the copole between the shafts mocks the couple on the car. And as your who may look like how on the outher side of his big beltry your tears enclose your nose and paradigm may re-rise in errand. Follow we up his whip vindicative. Thurston's, lo behold, la arboro, lo petrusio. The Augustan peace be to them oaks, the monolith rising stark from the moonlit pine barren. In all fortitudinous Ajaxius rowder noisy tenuosity. The angelus owl with ditches bent upon their farm utensils, the soft belling of the fallow deers, do re mus genuan, advertising their milky approach as midnight was striking the hours, litate, and how brightly the great tribune outed the sharkskin smokewallet, imitation, from his frock, kippers, and by Joshua. I lost my spot. I'm gonna. What is that? By Joshua. I will take this bit out. And by Joshua he tips in a topping swank cheroot, none of your swellish soid, quite the reverse, and how manfully he says, pluck to pluck, and leakin for lukin, he was to just pluggy well suck that brown boyo, me son, and spend a whole half hour in Havana. Sora of the Creeksman, would not thor be old high Gothsbrogue? Wherefore he meant to say, he do, sire, bester of red publicans, at Eaglecock Hostel on Lorenzo Tooley Street, and how he wished his honour the bannocks of Gort and Moria and Breehead and Puddy Rick, your lordship, and a starch box sitting in the pit of his St. Dominick's, a strange wish for you, my friend, and would poleaxe your sons, grandsons, utterly though your own sweat and swear florurants heaved at hock many as the times when they were terrified by the hits. Cheers for up King Billy, and crow cruel Cramwell's down a boo. Hop, boys, and had him. See? Oil beam thou lost that we've found romanticers, their hours to date link these airs to hear, but woo, where are those yours of yesterdays? Far singin' the rich and pool old woman Caracathercus and his Anne Van Vogt, Ed Ned, Indid, or sleeping soundlessly. favour with your tongues, intidenti. Any dog's life you list, you may still hear them at it, like sixes and seventies, as ever sure as Halley's Comet, Ulalumen, Sobranjur woman, Storthing boys and Doomer girls as they pass its bleak and bronze portal of your Casa Concordia. Huru more near mini frickens, word is darly dee det, lost door on left mladies, Q. Millicent Grondira do Scudi, Tippity, Kiri, Tippity, Ka he roti kai makar sahib, despenserim usted senor, esten son xoko sabes, o thor bron a kothrage, thinking now gaily, lick pa fly high, pa li si lang lang, epi allo eco batiste, tuvenar dons lipt, boing going, ismim di bumkak, e meas di portacole, os pipos mios es demasdia grasso por o piccolo pochino, wifi, undoro, cochis bad, mercy and you, gomach, thack. And cod, says he with his mugger's tears, would you care to know the prize of a liard? Maggers, nick your nighty novel. Mass taverners at the mic again, and that bag belly is the buck to goat it. McGay chap jappish fellow, I call our univalse to witness, as sicker as moi liffey eggs is known by our good householters from your hundreds to mammoth to be, which they commercially are in ahoy high British quarters, conventional. My guest house and cowhen handle credits will immediately stand open as straight as that neighbouring monument's fabrication before the hygienic gill. This was where the reverent Sabbath and bottle breaker with furbalk forth stretched and touched upon his tri-coloured boater, which he uplifted by its pickled hoopy. He gave Stetson one and a penny for it. While as oleogeny of ancestral oloosis scogiated down the both pendices of his multifotosed lip-tails, sent capetulo a more modestus conciliabuti never curled a torn pocket mouth. Cordially inwitting the adolescents who he was wising up to do in like manner what all did so as he was able to add, lobe before the great schoolmasters. I tell you no story. Smile. The house of Atriox is fallen into dust. Ilium, matramore, mournamates, averaging on blights like the Mundy banks of Fenjana. But deeds bounds going rise again. Life, he himself said once, his biographine, in fact, kills him very soon, if not yet not after, is a wake, livet or cricket, and on the bunk of our bread-winning lies the crops of our seed-father, a phrase which the establisher of the world by law might preternaturally write across the chest-front of all man or woman born. The scene, refreshed, re-roused, was never to be forgotten, the hen and crusader ever intermuta merchant, for later in the century one of that pucine band of fact-ferreteers, then an ex-civilly out of the custom huts, retired, hurt, under the 65s act in a dressy black modern style, and we were shiny tan Burlingtons, tan, Hommed and Dicky, quo Pricross and Pegajagged, rehearsed it, pepper pointing, with a dignified copy, bowed to a name cousin of the late Archdeacon F.X. Preserved Coppinger, a hot fellow in his night, may the mouther of God have mastic on him, in a pull woman of our first trans-Hibernian, with one still sadder circumstance, which is a dirk and lurk heart-skewer if ever to bring bouncing brimmers from Harvard eyes. Cycloptically through the window discs and with eddying oars the round eyes of the rundicers, back to back, buck to bucker, on their airish chaunting car, beheld with interesting anterousness the clad pursue the bear, and bear the green, and green the frore, and frore the clad again, as their convoy wheeled encirculingly abound the gigantic's life-tree, our fire-leaved lover-lucky, blow-master bomb, phoenix in our woodlessness, haughty, cacuminal, erubescent, repetition, whose roots they be ashes with lustres of peens. For as often as the Archicadinus, pleasing aside his Irish field and craving their auriculars to receptacle particulars before they got the bump at Castle Bar, Matt and Far, spoke of it by request all, hearing in this new reading of the part whereby, because of Dias in his Machina, the new Garrickson's grimacing grimadilism hypostatized on substantialone the axiomatic orotundity of that once grand old Elrington Hall. The copicous descriptions of that fellow commuter's play upon countenance could simply imagine themselves in their bosom's inmost core, as pro tem locums time-sported across the yawning abyss, as once they were seasiders, listening to the cock's high shooter's evensong evocation of the doomed, but always ventriloquent agitator. No not more planjo pound, the billows o'er Thuno Halla reef, silk-hatted, a wallings, might I add, against the dusk of Scumring. Would that fain be St. Mizzen's calling, holy places, and this fez brimless as brow of faithful toucher of the ground did wish it were, blessed be the bones, the Ghazi power of his sword. His mansplayer's son gun-wielder protended towards that overgrown lead pencil, which was soon, monumentally at last, to rise and Mollivigan told on to be his mausoleum. O Dan stod Tilsign as Mises eye scud show pon. While O'Lover his exculpatory features, as Roland rung, a wee droppeen of grief about to silenize his juice, the ghost of resignation diffused a spectral appealingness, as a young man's drown or the fate of his waters may gloat, similar in origin and accurate in effective to a beam of sunshine upon a coffin plate. Not olderwise in the days of the Bining would our traveller remote, unfriended from Van Diemen's Land, some lazy scold or maundering pote, lift weary Willie his slow-cut snobsick eyes to the semi-signs of his zoo-attack, and lengthily lingering along flask necks, cracket cup, down-trodden brogue, turf-sod, wild broom, cabbage-blad, stockfish longingly learn that there at the Angel were herberged for him poteen and tea and praties and baccy and wine with women worth warbling, and informally quasi begin to present to meal the quizathin. Nonsense! There was not very much windy noose blowing at the given moment through the hat of Mr. Melancholy Slow. But in the pragma, what formal cause made a smile of that to think? Who was he to whom? O'Brien's not his name, nor the brown one his maid. Who's the place wares? Kiwesti, Kiska, Kitha, Kitnabunja. Tell the tem of the tumulum, give the gab of the groob, be it cudgel player's country, or fish fellow's town, or leak licker's land, or Panapovingreski. What regnans raise the reins have levelled, but we hear the pointers, and can gauge their compass, for the melos yields the mode, and the mode the manners, plickyman, plancyman, plucyman, plab. Sin, 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 sin. The forefathers Folker for a prize of 2 peaches with Ming, Ching, and Shunny on the lie-low lee. We'll sit down on the hope of the ghouly ghost, for the tithe-man troubleth, but his hantitat highs not here. They answer from the zones. Here the 4 of them. Talk toror of them. I, says Armar, and I'm proud of it. I, says Clonakilty, God help us. I, says Dean's Grange, and say nothing. I, says Barna, and what about it? Hee-haw! Before he fell hill, he filled heaven. A stream, up-lapping streamlet, coily coiled cool of her curls. We were but thermites then. We, our ant-heap we sensed as a hill of Allen, the barrow for a people, not jot nurse jail. And it was a grimmelung among the pork troop that wonder-struck us as a thunder yonder. Thus the unfacts, did we possess them, are too imprecisely few to warrant our certitude. The evidence givers by Legpole, too untrustworthily irreparable, were his adjugers are seemingly freak threes, but his judicandes plainly -2s. Nevertheless, Madame's Joyce waxes largely more lifelike, entrance, 1 kudos, exits, free, and our notional gullery is now completely complacent, an exegious monument, airily perennious, obliged with your blackthorns, gamps, de grace, and there many have paused before that exposure of him by old Tom Quad, a flashback in which he sits sated, gowned about, in clericalese habit, watching bland souls slide dodgesomely into the nethermore, a globule of moggledness about to corrugate his wild-dewed cheek and the tartar of tiny Victorian Alice, pressed by his limper looser. Yet certes one is. Eher the hollowing winter had overrid the pages of nature's book until Ceodober Atta Cleith became Dablina Tertia, the shadow of the huge outlander, Maledic, Multivalt, Magnopyrrhus, had bulked at the bar of a rota of tribunals in Manor Hall as in Thieves' Kitchen, mid pillow talk and chit-house chat on Marlborough Green, as through Molesworth Fields, here sentence pro tried with Jedburgh justice, there acquitted testimony with benefit of clergy. His thing mod have undone him, and his mad thing has done him man. His beneficiaries are legion in the part he created. They number up his years. Great Wheel Dunlop was the name was on him, behung as we are his bicycles. And holiday in his house, so was he priest and king to that. Ulvy came, envy saw, ivy conquered. Lou, they have waved his green bows o'er him as they have torn him limb from limb. For his mortification and expiration and damnation and annihilation with Shrice and Grider, de profound shoespears, steady Sullivans, Mannikin's paws, Long Tongue's breech is fallen down, but Gronia's speeds abroad. Aduste, fee daily ones, and feel the flucker's balls, for the total of your flouts is not fit to fan his fettle. Oh, have a ring and sing wool, chin chin, chin chin. And of course all chimed in with the eatmost boviality, swiping rums and bjones and sherries and ciders and negus and citronades too, the strongest. Oh ho, Mr. Begg, you're about to be bagged in the bog again. Bug. But softies side, a hue for gassies. But lo, by the threnning gods, human, erring, and condonable, what the statues of our Quo, who as the mischief be our Quang, assure there, the unforgettable tree shade looms up behind the jostling judgments of those, as all should owe, mal-recapturable days. Tap and pat, and tap it again. Fire first shot, messieurs the refusaliers. Ping pong for Saxon Luty. 3 Tomics, soldiers free, Cockaleek and Capapay of the Coldstream. Guards were walking in. Pardonnez-le, Gieva in Prix, Montgomery Street. One voice and opinion in which on either wide, pardonnez, nodding, all the Finnegans conferred. J'ai vu in Prix, It was the first woman, they said, souped him that fatal Wellersday, Lily Conningham's, by suggesting him they go in a field. Roth mold Eldfar, Ruth Red Stillsand, Roth racked Roth, confessed Private Pat Murchison retro, terse. Thus contenters with Santoy's play. One of our coming Vauxhall on the boards, who is resting for the moment, she has been cullet by a noted stagey elocutioner, a waste packet sit-ons, was interviewed in a Waste End pewty parlour, looking perhaps even more pewty-flushed in her cherry-derry padesays, girdle and braces by the half-moon and 7 stars, russets from the blackamoor's head, amongst the climbing boys at his eagle and child, and over the corn and hay emptors at their black and all-black Mrs. F. A. set aside, half in stage of whisper and to her confidant Glass, while recuperating her cartwheel chapet. A hat, and now we know what thimbles a backets on Lallance at alls mean. She hoped. Sid Arthur would get a Christman's portrait of orange and lemon-sized orchids with hollegs and ether from the feature of the incident, as the world has been uncaned. Then, while it is odorous comparising to the sprang flowers of his birthday, which was a veritable god in potty for the rainworms and the charlatinas and all branches of climatitis, it has been such a wonderful noth entirely, added she, with many regards to Maha's Prangipanses. Tart. Prehistoric. Oh, bitter to his dictaphone, an encyclologist. His promonen is proper is menon. A dustman, knock-named 7 churches, in the employ of Messrs. Archburn, Saltpetre, and Asherbon, prayer-makers, Glinterlook, was asked by the sisterhood the vexed question during his midday collation of lever and buckrome, alternatively with stenk and kitteny fie, in a hash-house, and thank heaven, responds impulsively, we have just been propagandering his nullity suit, and what they took out of his ear among my own crush. All our fellows at O'Day's Sages with at Aratar Calaman. He is a cemented brick, bucket all. A more nor usually sober car driver, who was jauntily hosing his runabout, Ginger Jane, took a strong view. Laurie hosed her as he talked, and this is what he told right men. Ironwalker is just a plain pink joint reformee in private life, but folks all have it by Brahman's laws has parliamentary honours. I Scaffer said, Luigi's, you know that man's brilliant Savorain, Mon foi, you wish to have some omelette, yes, lady? Good, mein Lieber, your heg he must break himself. See, a crack, so, he sit in the pool, unbetimpt. A perspirer over 60 who was keeping up his tennises panted, He ne ho ha toi to elect fintimatios, but the diffbard flannels climb wall and trespassing on doorbell. After full-blown Braddon hear this fresky Totterella, a railway's barmaid's view, they call her Spiltier's Rue, and thus expressed to sympathizers of the Dole line, Death Avenue anent those objects of a pity-prompted ministrance to wet man and his siphon. Ahem! It is ever too late to whistle when Phyllis floods her stable. It would be scarlet shame to jail him in the lock-up, as was proposed to him by the Sedum's creature. What matter what merry tricks went off with the revolver in connections with him being an orphan and enjoining such wicked ilth him. Well done, Drum Colloquial. Kitty Tyrrell is proud of you, was the reply of a BOT official. Oh, blame not the board. While the daughters Bencletter murmured in uniswoon, Gall for Glitty's jewelry legs. Brian Linsky, the cub cursor, was questioned at his shouting box, Ballin' Braggett, and gave a snappy comeback when saying, Paw, once more I'll hellbow, for I am for caveman chasing Sahara sex, Burke you. Them 2 bitches ought to be leashed, Canem. Up, hog and whore hunt. Paw! A would-be martyr who is attending on St. Acitas, where he is being taught to wear bracelets, when grilled on the point, revealed the undoubted fact that the consequence would be that as long as Sanka Mundi played his mango tricks under the Mr. Tree, with shady apsaras sheltering in his leaves license, and his shadow was torrified by the potent bolts of intertraction, there would be fights all over Cuxhaven. Tosh. Missioner Ida Wombwell, the 17-year-old revivalist, said concerning the coincidence of interfizzing with the grenadines and other respectable and disgusted persons using the park, that perpendicular person is a brute, but a magnificent brute, Caligula. Mr. Dan McGrath, bookmaker, well known to Australian poor users of the Sydney Parade Balloton, was as usual and typical with his striving toady, hoppening tomello, wear splash, cobbler. We have meet 2 hourly, sang out El Kaplan by count, with a famous Padres Turters Cape cast, meet 2 hourly Matadeer. Dan Meiklejohn, precenter of SS Smack and Ollies, was proverbial in his upsiduxit, mutatus mutatandus. Duran's lord, Sniffpox, and Morgan's lady, Flatterfun, took sides and crossed and bowed to each other's views and recrossed themselves. The dirty dubs, youping their flies, went to free, echoed the dainty drabs down in their sanities, una mona. Sylvia Silence, the girl detective, Minerva, but by now one hears turtlings all over Doveland. When supplied with informations as to the several facets of her case in her cozy-dozy bachelor's flat, quite overlooking John O'Dream's mews, leaned back in her really truly easy chair to query restfully through her vowel-threaded syllables. Have you ever thought, wee po to that shoe greatness was his tragedy? Nevertheless, according to my considered attitudes, for this act he should pay the full penalty, pending pursuant as su per subsec 32, section 11 of the CLA Act 1885, anything in this act to the contrary notwithstanding. Jarley Jilk began to silk, for he couldn't get home to Chelsea, but ended with, he's got a sack that helped him moot in stench with his gladsome rags. Moore, a naval rating, seated on one of the granite cromlech sects of our new fish shambles for the usual air-eating after the ever-popular act, with whom were Questa and Puella, piquant and quite. This had a cold in her brain, while that felt a sink in her stomach. What's wet, was encouraged, though near vanished himself, by one of his co-affianced, to get your breath, Walt, and gobbet, and when they're chitten by her fastra sastra to saddle up your pants, Navel. Thus Cora replied to her others thank kissing, I lay my 2 finger buttons, fiancé Mora. He speaks. He was to blame about your 2 velvet thighs up Horniman's Hill, as Hook and I blame him or any other piskman. But I also think, Pewley Wally, by the siege of his trousers, there was someone else behind it, and you bet your bottom blarneys about their 3 drummers down Keeser's Lane. Trite. That was the first half of Chapter 1-3 from Finnegans Wake, and as we were promised, Sdense.
It is. I was like, what's happening? What's happening?
Wait, why don't we jump straight to the Oxford World Classic summary, just to give us a sense about what's going on in this section. This is Humphrey Ad 2, continuing study of other outrages against HCE. So you'll notice, if you're listening along, that we didn't have a segment break for the first 10 pages. So the first 10 pages from 48 to 58:22 was a single section. Yes. And this is the longest session we've had so far in the book. I'm sure there are longer ones coming, but this is a really long one. So this one, 48 to 58:22, time destroys witnesses and evidence. The gossips and balladeers all come to a bad end. Versions of the first encounter still embound. Okay.
You have something bad to say about me? Smite you. You're dead.
Yeah. And then from 58:23 to the end of the section, 61:27, Vox Populi about HCE. This became a little bit clearer, where everyone was starting to jump in with their opinions.
I was like, first off, I was like, HCE, philanderer, just going around. Like, it got to the point where I was like, when did they start using a certain C word to mean? So there were a couple things I did, like a quick little Google, because I was like, yep, okay, he knows what he's doing here. A bit of vulgarity, but it's kind of fun. And then the ping pong for the shot, I chuckled. I also, it's funny because I always think no one uses the word feign enough. We always talk about the profane, but no one uses the word feign. So when it popped up, I got super excited. And this is incredibly random, and this feels just like a dramaturgical thing. I'm like learning Zulu on Duolingo, mostly because I was like, why not? Right?
Yeah.
But the Zulu word for stop is in here.
Oh, Joyce.
I was all like, wait, what?
Of course it is. Joyce is thinking French, Italian, German, Russian. No. Zulu. Let's go to...
And I was all like, wait, what's the next 2 words? Followed by Hungarian for like car and free. So I was like, okay.
Amazing.
Sure.
Yeah, obviously the first section is a lot denser than the second. And some really interesting things. I mean, on page 54... we have a section that's entirely in dialect, no English in there at all, of the second paragraph on page 54. And that was a bit of a slog to get through that. I'm sure someone's written there like an entire chapter of the dissertation on this section of this chapter in terms of breaking this all down. And obviously we see remnants of multiple languages come out there. I tried very hard not to be offensive in my my phonetic pronunciation. I almost certainly
He
butchered it.
forces it on you.
He does a little bit, but a lot of it. So as soon as I got to the end of a sentence and I said sahib, and then I went, oh no, that was. This is an Indian dialect, and I don't know how whether or not I did it justice. So it's one of those things. Things pop up, and you think, "Am I doing this the way it should be done, or is there?" So I'm sure that the recordings that we have talked about already, where the 28-hour recordings, probably do these very good justice, and it's probably very interesting to listen to those sections. And I'm kind of curious about going and finding them to hear those sections, to hear how they manage it. But I don't think he's expecting anyone to follow along and jump from line to line to line,
right?
But he does. I did notice he does use the word autodidact in there at one point, and I think he's expecting us to be autodidacts in a lot of ways. It's a phrase that my father uses all the time, because he doesn't have any classical education, but he claims to be an autodidact. He's learned everything himself, and there's a lot of that autodidaction in here, where you're learning on the fly.
Oh yeah,
and then it's the kind of thing where going back and figuring out what you've just read or what you've just said. I think you could probably read this book at an incredibly slow pace, line by line, if you really wanted to, and take years to get through it. And people do that, I'm sure. I noticed on page 53, about halfway down, I'm going to suggest to my son that he call his next rock band Sharkskin Smokewallet.
Right? It's so good.
So that's a finalist.
I like that.
And I'm very aware that a lot of our analysis is incredibly like, look at this funny word.
Yeah,
Isn't this funny? This made me
great.
laugh. The purists. I'm sorry, purists, but we're here just pointing to things that made us laugh.
I'm kind of here for on page 52, spake of the one and told of the compassionate. I was like, that's great. But also at the bottom of page 53, instead of saying 3 cheers, he just gives you 3 cheers.
Yeah, cheers.
I was like, that's great.
Yeah, it's one of those things. It's really interesting to go through and to say a word and realize at the very end of the word that he wants you to say, but you're saying it without interpreting it. Yeah. And so it makes me want to go. I get to the end of the word and I go, oh, that's what he means, and it almost makes me want to go back and clarify it. But then that's not the point of what we're doing here. But it's really reminding us that, okay, I've messed with the way that you're used to how that word is shown on the page, how that word is spelt. But I'm going to abbreviate it, and I'm going to smash it into 6 other words, and you're going to say it, and then your brain is going to catch up, and understand it. Yeah, it's
also love his flex of pop culture on 51. Since in this Scheherazade of 1001 nightiness, which Scheherazade is probably one of my favorite pieces of music, one of my favorite folk tales, like altogether. And then on the very next page, Annie Oakley deadliness.
Yeah,
it's just like pure Americana, I'm like,
absolutely, yeah.
But Annie Oakley deadliness is just. That's a phrase that you could use today.
Yeah, absolutely. And we know exactly what he means. We also had on page 59, or at least throughout that page, it's shifting into hearing multiple voices. We must hear a dozen different voices of people who are there in the bar, giving their opinions, and many different accents.
Yes.
Many different tongues. Obviously, there's French in there, but then there's different kinds in it. And he jumps from person to person. We have this entire section is a single paragraph, and all of it is he talks about one guy, then moves to this woman, and then moves to this other person, and never breaks it up in such a way, and it sort of really feels like this cacophony. Yeah, and everyone's shouting their opinions, what they mean, and then we have accents where suddenly I was drawn into speaking in a baby voice.
As you sounded like you're from Princess Bride, you know.
Marriage.
Yeah, exactly.
That shew greatness to his tragedy.
Yeah, I was like, this is fantastic.
And there's no other way to say it. You can't say that. And the interesting thing about that is you can't say that without a smile on your face. But it's also very clearly this Sylvia Silence character. Has very clearly got this little speech impediment or this mannerism, and he's mimicking it, but she's not a comedic character necessarily.
She's talking about the law. She's like, based on everything that he's done, this is what should happen.
Yeah. So that was a fun.
I have a question for you. Which insult would you rather be called? Caligula, sniffbox, or flatterfun? Because I was like,
flatterfun. Wow, that's it's.
I'd be offended someone called me Caligula. Like, excuse me.
Yeah, there's a lot in there. There's a lot of depth in there, but flatterfun, sniffpox. It's one of those chapters that again I feel as though it's a trap chapter for the casual reader. Surely anyone lulled into a sense of false security in 1-2 is out again now.
Yeah.
We're not out. We're here. We're here for it.
This was fun.
Yeah. It's an interesting one. I'm going to looking forward to listening to this one back and to seeing what else comes out of it. And obviously we have the second half of this section coming up next week. So
if you ever see me down and just having a bad day, just read that. Have you ever thought?
That shew greatness is his tragedy.
That shew greatness is his tragedy.
What a birthday present. Thank you, Joyce. I really appreciate what you've brought for us. So, look, that is all the time we have for Wake for this week. But we really enjoyed the discussion and really enjoyed the chance to get into this dense section. We are not afraid of the dense sections. We are not just here for the fun music. We are also here for the stuff that curls our brains a little bit. For more sleep ASMR, join us next week where we will continue delving into this mind-bending tome. I've been Toby Malone, joined by TJ Young, and we are seriously making progress. Join us next week for the second half of Chapter 1-3 with another very special guest. See you then, obscurity lovers. This has been Wake, a cold reading of James Joyce's Finnegans Wake, just to hear it out loud. If you've made it this far, thank you for your dedication. Join us next week for another segment of Finnegans Wake and a chat about what we've found. Wake is a Moon Street Media podcast, engineered by TJ Young and Toby Malone. Our theme song is The Ballad of Perso Riley, arranged and performed by Meg Logue after James Joyce. Wake is recorded in Canada, where Finnegans Wake is in the public domain. For community and bonus content, join us at our free Patreon at patreon.com/wakepod. If you have questions about Finnegans Wake, don't ask us. We're just as confused as you are. See you next week.